tell us your 2 favorite tennis courts you've ever played on back when you were a player. You remember maybe 2 of your favorite places you played?
Well, one for sure. Ironically, they both happen to be grass.
Okay.
Queen's Club. I was fortunate enough to practice there when I was playing in England because I have British citizenship. So I snuck into the LTA and got out there. And then Newport Beach, Rhode Island, when I got to play Zena Garrison. And I played doubles with her actually as well. So pretty good memories. I
Wow.
tend to like the grass because then I don't have to bend. Even though I'm short, I didn't even have to bend at all. So it was perfect.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, along the same kind of theme, when we talk about coaches in the Triad, give us maybe your favorite coach growing up and why that person was one of your favorites or most impactful maybe.
I mean, I definitely have more than one, but you know, my local home coach, so that was growing up, and then in between breaks in college, that would be Tony Palafox, who coached on Long Island for many years. Some might know him as John McEnroe's coach. The funny thing is Tony was a pretty good player himself, having won 2 U.S. Open titles in doubles back in his day. So he would definitely be a huge impact, still is. I still communicate with him regularly, and we'll touch on that a little bit more down the track here. And then I would say probably my assistant coach from Georgia, Mark Gilbo, who was a grad assistant when I started. He ended up being a full-time assistant, and then when I turned pro, my first year on tour, I trained and lived with him out of Lexington, Kentucky, where he was the head coach. And the funny thing is they're very different, Tony and Mark, but both were able to really bring out the best. And then, you know, now I think about another one is Ola Munkvist, who now runs, you know, the women. I think he oversees the women's tennis for USTA. I lived with him when I was pro as well after I worked with Mark. And all 3 very different personalities, actually, if you know all 3 of them. And but all were really good about finding ways to tap into getting me to work hard, which wasn't the easiest task on a daily basis. So.
Right. Well, actually, I think in Tony's bio, it also says former coach of Tina Samara.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Where's the bio hidden?
Right after the John McEnroe coaching stint. So it made the bio. Well, so if we're staying inside the Triad here, remember back to when you were playing and your mom and dad could maybe come out and watch you play. Do you remember the most memorable match for you that your parents were at?
Well, they were bad memories. My parents, too, are very different. My mom's from Norway and my dad's from Sri Lanka, so in every way they're different. And when they watch matches, they were very different. My dad didn't move, just sat there. And my mom was like, you know, every time I missed or did something, you know, good and bad, but I remember more that, like, you know, like when I hit a drop shot from behind the baseline and it bounced before the net. That my mom's reaction. So, but I would say winning the NCAA title, my parents were able to be there at Georgia for that. And I mean, you can't really get a better moment than that, I don't think, unless you're winning Grand Slams, which was not in the cards for me.
Well, and you mentioned Norway and Sri Lanka, which makes you Norlankan, right?
Correct.
There you go. A lot of people don't realize that. Well, so we touched a little bit on kind of like your past, but maybe the folks that are listening in don't realize, I mean, you were a really good junior player who played at University of Georgia. Go Dogs.
Go Dogs.
That's just for you, okay? But All-American there, you guys won a national title. You played Fed Cup for Norway. You coached college tennis at a number of spots up and down the chain, probably most notably Wisconsin, would you say, there, and West Virginia. So you come from a very strong coaching and playing background, which we'll touch on a lot during the talk today, which fits directly into the triad of parent-player coaching and those relationships. Talk a little bit about what you're doing now that you're not coaching college tennis.
Yeah, so after years coaching college, I seem to notice an issue across the board with most players, not just on my team, but talking to friends that coach and everything like that, that the kids didn't seem, I remember having so much fun in college, sometimes too much fun. Not saying follow in my footsteps exactly, but I did feel like I left school with so many stories. And when I get together still with teammates, the stories we talk about are, you know, when we were late for practice and had to run extra, or it wasn't winning national titles as much as that was a huge part of my experience. The memories I really think about are not about wins and losses. It's more about the blood, sweat, and tears, as they say, throughout the 4 years. And I felt really bad that my players were so stressed out and weren't really able to enjoy the journey, as cliche as that is. But there's a real reality to that. And my first school I ever coached as a head coach was Louisiana Lafayette, and the smallest budget I ever coached at a school I ever coached, and probably the kids there I felt like overall all those kids had a great experience. And every year I think it got a little bit less that way, and I think it's just all the pressures and the social media and how things had changed and comparisons. And you know, I have a good story about Louisiana. You know, this is sort of like when kids were starting to go on the internet a lot and look up rankings, and we were supposed to play Northwestern State, which people might know is a school in Louisiana. But my team, we're out on the courts warming up, and they're looking super nervous. And I'm like, what is wrong with you? And my Czech girl, Julie, who I love to death, she just said, well, we looked up, we're playing Northwestern, and they're 4 in the nation. And I was like, what are you talking about? No, we're not playing Northwestern and from Chicago. We're playing Northwestern State. I can't even remember how to say the very, you know, Cajun town that's from, or I don't know if it's a Cajun name, but it's a really long Louisiana name. But I was like, guys, that is a very different team. First, that just shows how, you know, you can look things up and get things wrong and put things in your head. And I think with all that access to information that often is incorrect, these kids are really just constantly stressed and everything. So I decided after I left college coaching that I wanted to find a way to maybe help this issue. And I started kind of just nonchalantly a mentoring type program where I wanted to help high school athletes that are going through transition to collegiate, trying to play collegiately, to help them manage the expectations, help the parents manage the expectations, help the parents and player get on the same page, because often they're not on the same page of where they want to go or how committed they want to be. And then the second part of that would be current college kids, even though I know at some of the schools, especially that I was at, have amazing resources for athletes. A lot of the athletes are, for whatever reason, not comfortable always using them on campus. I don't know if they're afraid for confidentiality or someone's going to find out and think that they, you know, something's wrong with them or whatever. So I felt like maybe I could help mentor essentially, you know, college kids. Since I did play collegiately and I did coach collegiately, I kind of know what the coaches a lot of times are feeling. And a perfect example is I had a girl who didn't play for me, but played for another school, a Power 5 school, and called me just like, I hate it, I hate the coach, blah, blah, blah. And it really simply was lack of communication. And I said, well, did you tell the coach that? And she's like, no. And I'm like, well, you need to give the coach an opportunity before you just write off the school and the coach and everything. Because often I found out through other players or after I left coaching that a player thought this or that. And I'm like, I had no idea. And had I known, I would really feel like that would be something I could have quickly fixed or addressed. So I wanted to see if I could be a resource for players in that situation. And then the third part would be, I found a lot of my college coaching friends feel like players that are finishing school that aren't turning pro, that aren't signing contracts with IMGs, are freaking out and don't know what to do. Like, where do I go now? What do I do? So that's like, there's a 3-part process to the mentoring program. And then within some time, I decided, you know, why not add college placement to that? It's a pretty natural addition to what I do. Again, I feel like I've been on all sides of it. So I know when I recruited some mistakes I made. I know when I recruited some things I were told about athletes that maybe weren't necessarily true or not, you know, little misinformation here and there. Right. So I wanted to try to create a company that the tagline is really full transparency. Like it's going to be with the player and the parents when I speak to them to decide whether we're going to work together. There's full transparency. So I'm not going to sit here and promise you I'm not going to promise anything, but I'm not going to say I guarantee you Power 5 if you're a guy and you're an 8 UTR. You know, I mean,
Right.
I'm gonna and I lose and I have lost clients for that full transparency, but I think again in the long run it's gonna build a very solid foundation. It's hard sometimes because you're like, oh, it would have been nice to have that client, especially during COVID and business isn't booming. But
Right.
I do think for the big picture, I want to make sure that I maintain that. You know, and as I said, it's really important for my relationships that I've already created over the 11 years of coaching, and even more than that, playing, that I am honest, because this business is me, myself, and I really. And, you know, if I am sending kids to places they don't belong for whatever reason, and I'm selling the wrong things, eventually, obviously, not too far from now, that's going to come back and bite me, and it's certainly not a really good business model.
So let me ask you this. Let me ask you this real quick while we're on that topic, though. A lot of players and parents think that, well, if nowadays my UTR is really high, then I should be, my phone should be ringing. Back in the old days, it was, I'm ranked number 1 or number 2 or whatever. My ranking was high, then I should be, getting offers. Nowadays, it's UTR. What do you say to the parent or the player that says, well, gosh, I've got this great UTR. Should I not be just offers pouring in?
Yeah, I mean, it's competitive, and, I think where I can kind of help, the big area I can help is pushing you a little bit higher than maybe you could have on your own. So, maybe getting that 9.2 UTR to a Power 5 or a top 50 program, not Power 5 because they're not all, but, to a top 50. And I'm working on a kid like that right now and again, it's because I know she's good enough, and there's a story behind why her UTR is where it is. And my goal is, again, I'm looking out for your best interest. There are offers out there for this girl that I could easily sell because she's not American and they wouldn't really know, but it's more than that to me. It's a relationship that I hope with every client, since it is a boutique business, that I have a relationship with forever, whether they want to end up going into coaching or whether it's college coaching or club coaching, maybe I can help facilitate that down the road. I just think the good news is, so far, talking to coaches, I do feel like my background helps in not guaranteeing anything, but at least getting that coach to take a look and a deeper dive, because I think it is true that a lot of coaches, they're busy and they're basing a lot of opinions on numbers very within 5 minutes, yes or no. And I think a lot of the kids I'm working with, if you look beyond that, these are kids that are really most of the kids I'm working with are actually really still a little bit raw. I was too, relative to my level. Like, I don't think I thought, and I don't know how many other people thought I would do what I did collegiately, because my game was still developing. So I needed a coach to believe that, and I was lucky at Georgia where the coach just happened to see me play a really good match one day. So.
Well, so while we're on that topic right there, with your background as a player and a coach at a number of levels, talk about that as it relates to kind of the recruiting process, because a lot of times, having coached college tennis myself and still currently doing it, there's a lot of recruiting services out there that are, shopping kids around, and a lot of parents and maybe even some teaching pros don't understand kind of what they do. Maybe touch a little bit about that, because you come from a different perspective, having been on that other side of the fence.
Yeah. Well, the reality is I've made mistakes, and some of them were mistakes that were on me, and some of them were mistakes where I trusted someone I shouldn't have trusted, and there's everything in between. Again, you deal all the time with expectations, and if a kid was a top junior, here's an example. A friend of mine's niece, she's a gymnast. She's like, I think, one of the top gymnasts in Washington State. And I don't know gymnastics that well, and I'm not helping. They're not a client, but it's a friend of a friend, so just talking. And, I happen to know the coaches at LSU well, because they were coaches at Georgia when I was there, and Georgia gymnastics is ridiculous, and LSU is. So I was thinking, oh, this kid's won in Washington, she's probably going to be perfect for LSU. Well, it's not even close to the level they need. So just because you're number one in your state doesn't automatically mean you're going to be in a top 10 program. And you have to remember too that coaches, different programs look for different things. Some coaches have a certain game style they're looking for. They like girls or guys that hit, big serves, big forehands. They play a lot of indoor tennis. They want a kid that's got a big game, or you have schools that are grinders in schools. They're in the South. They're in the heat. They're just like, although with clinch, that's not that great anymore. But, and then there's, depending on what they need that year in their lineup, they're losing their top kids. Now, of course, I try to talk the coaches down a little bit. Like, you can't just expect to replace your number one with a freshman like right away. That's a little bit unrealistic, but that's what they want. And I understand that because I coached, and obviously you want to get the best kid you can get. So I think that the key for me is really creating, again, I think it's telling a story. And that's why I think where I'm a little bit different, where when I sign on a client and a family, it's me and them the entire time. There's no secretaries, there's no, you're dealing with this person for this. It's all me, because I think the more time I spend with this kid and the family, the better I get to know them. And the better I get to know them, the more likely I'll know, hey, this is the kind of school I think and coach you're really going to like. It seems like this is going to fit your personality. Because a great example, Tony Palafox, and I can segue into this real quick, is, one of my greatest stories with Tony is, I'm a New Yorker. I had a little bit of a temper. I'm a lefty, typical lefty, I would say. And, I was practicing with one day. I was probably 16, and I don't know what happened, but apparently I wasn't happy, and I just chucked my racket like the court away. And then I'm like looking at him, and then he just takes his racket and chucks it further. And we're just both standing there with no rackets. I'm like, for me, that was exactly what I needed. He didn't tell me to run suicides or, that was what made me motivated. It was like, made me laugh, and it made me like say, look, I look like an idiot, go get your racket and play. Where that tactic for every player is not going to be the best tactic. That's how he was super laid back. And you would think for someone like me that I felt like, was a little bit lazy sometimes, would need someone that was constantly yelling at me, but it was actually not the case. His approach was very much kind of like, I'm going to let you figure it out. I'm not going to yell at you. And that worked. But just like college coaches, that doesn't mean they're a bad coach because they don't work for you.
Right.
Their just style isn't good, what gels well with you. So I'm trying to find that. I always ask these kids and the parents, like, what coaching style do you like? Do you like to be pushed? Do you like a little bit of like, even a little bit of yelling? Someone that's like, move your feet, what are you doing? Or, and that will help me help them.
Well, one of the things that I hear as a coach, and I think parents fall into this trap and kids fall into it, is D1. So I want to play D1. Now, the reality is they probably don't understand that there's 5 levels of Division I college tennis out there. They probably don't understand all the other levels. Talk about that and how you address that with parents and players, and then also other coaches.
Yeah, well, a big thing in tennis in particular, I think only other sport similar maybe is golf, is where you're going to play in the lineup. If I am a top college, high school player, top relatively speaking, not top like Stanford level, and my goal is to play NCAA singles and doubles and All-American. I'm not making those goals playing 5 at Georgia.
Right.
The 5th player at Georgia doesn't make those tournaments. So I could go to, University of Illinois Chicago in the Horizon League, who they win the Horizon League a lot, and play 1 or 2 and pretty much make that goal happen almost every year. So if you want individual success in terms of these individual tournaments, you've got to pick your school a lot more based on where you fit in that program. And obviously if you're interested in developing and playing pro, you need to find a really good coach, not just a good program. Of course, being around good players, you're going to have good practices to some extent, but most players, like John Isner talks about it all the time, like he never feels like he would have been the player he became if he didn't go to college and get the structure that he needed at the time. No different than, NAIA, like the difference isn't necessarily the level of coach or even player. It might be the depth overall, but again, then you make sure the schools you're looking at make sense within your level for the depth that you belong in. But another story happens. I coached a girl in Colorado years ago who easily could have played mid-major D1. And she also had tremendous academics, so she was good to go. And she chose to go to Johns Hopkins and D3 and won a national title and got a degree from Johns Hopkins and is saving the world now and married. And I guarantee you she couldn't have had such a good experience at the D1s that she would have gone to in terms of what she would have won, the team relationship she had based on those experiences. And I talk to the coach now because I'm helping other kids, and I have a couple looking at that kind of school, and he still talks about her, so, and her experience was fantastic. So I think it's kind of trying to explain to kids and parents that, unfortunately the way we have labeled it D1, D2, D3 makes it sound like one's better than two and two is better than three. And we all know, or the people that are really involved in college tennis know there's D2 programs that beat D1 programs. There's NAI programs that beat D1 programs. There's even some junior colleges that give D1 programs a run for their money. So it really, it's unfortunate. I can equate it to playing golf and you play from the ladies' tees. Like there's a lot of men that should be playing from the ladies.
Yeah, me probably. Yeah. Well, so we talk about college tennis, international versus American players. Your take on that, because the vibe out there is, look, if I'm an American player, I just don't have a chance because all the spots are taken up by international players, and coaches only want international players, and that may or may not be the case. Give us your kind of take on that.
I think it's individual. I mean, my philosophy as a coach was ideal world would be half-half, and that's only because my experience was so great. I had teammates from South Africa, I had a teammate from France, teammate from Holland, and the reality is, and having a Norwegian mom and a Sri Lankan dad, is I traveled a little bit more internationally than some of my friends because of my background and had explored a little bit more. U.S. is such a big country. You can drive from, one end to the other, but you're still speaking English. You're still paying with dollars. Generally you have a little bit different accents around the country, but it's generally the same. If you live in, France, you drive a few hours and you're in a completely different country, different language, that kind of thing. So I felt like especially my really American teammates, it was such a great experience for them to have teammates from other cultures, that had other experiences, that had different opinions. And when fortunate enough, when we backpacked through Europe with our baguette and jar of Nutella, we had places when we wanted real food, we had somewhere we could go. But, so I'm a big fan of when I coached, I always did an international meal every 6 months. Every player had to bring a meal from their hometown or their home country. So I really like it. I mean, maybe, there may be coaches that only recruit international. I don't know why you would. To me, it's like, you're going to recruit the best kids you can get. And, for me, I want the level to be as high as it can be. So it's just a competitive, an addition to what makes it competitive. Just no different than admissions to schools. I think, you're just raising the bar.
Well, along those lines, because we have right at 100 people watching in, listening in to the presentation today, majority of them are teaching pros that are out there. What can teaching pros, because if you haven't noticed, in the last month or two, 3 months, with the current pandemic situation, a lot of schools have dropped their tennis programs. What can teaching pros do to help in this process with finding the connections between, say, their junior players, because that's the lifeblood of a program, and college or the services that you provide?
Well, I mean, I think, Bill, you and I have talked about this a lot. Even though there are programs being cut, and this is a tough time for sure, and it's still an unknown time. We don't know how much worse it might get. It could get quite a bit worse, or it could kind of maintain, and there's no answers for that. But I think there's still plenty of schools and programs, and again, that's where maybe people need to be more open and educated about the different levels that are out there and within your own state. because again, obviously in-state tuition on its own is already a lot less expensive. So I think it's really important. I think that's what we did a really good job at Georgia when I played, is really being involved in the community and at the local clubs and building a bridge between the two, and we're creating those relationships, because I think, as you see and what we're hearing, is the programs that are managing to survive right now have a lot of support, and that support doesn't happen overnight. It's a lot of work. The coaches over the years and the administration has spent a lot of time, getting involved with the community, so that there's a loss if they're getting rid of the program, as opposed to, oh, well, we never went anyway,
Right.
So I think it's really about building relationships, but, at the end of the day, I think it's just making sure you keep educating yourself on what's going on. And I was a teaching pro for a couple of years, and I didn't have time after 8 hours of melting in the heat to go look what's going on. So I think that's where I'm a good resource. You're a great resource because you're in both worlds kind of, but like of college and club, and obviously you're connected to so many people that know this stuff, but to really find out what's going on, and it's changing so often right now that every day, we've dropped lead programs. There's a couple schools that added a tennis program. So like, believe it or not, and there's coaches obviously being hired right now as it's going on. So I think maybe starting a little earlier in terms of, what opportunities might be out there. So I used to tell everyone, right before your year 11, you should start really getting serious. Maybe now it's 6 months sooner.
Well, we talked earlier about your parents being at your match back when you played at Georgia and being involved with your tennis. How do parents factor into tennis at the college level? You want to touch on that a little bit?
Well, if you ask my parents, they say the best day of their life was when I signed those papers, because my mom was like, never again will I tell you to eat a banana or to jump rope or to I can't wait for you to be someone else's problem.
Thanks, Mom.
Yeah. Well, of course, my mom and I were the ones traveling all the time, and a 16-year-old girl is not always the easiest to deal with. There were lots of sparring times in those days, and rental car keys being tossed around, and my mom is an athlete but never competed, so she got her information from reading, and you could read all kinds of things, and so I think the greatest thing about when your kid competes collegiately, I think it's the way it should be, is they're now someone else's problem. If they're not training hard, that's the coach to deal with it. That if they're within reason, obviously if there's abuse going on or something, that's a whole nother situation that hopefully you don't deal with. But generally, I think it's time to really let go and let them work out their issues a little bit, which I definitely found tough as a coach when I found literally parents flying in to complain about things, and I'm like shocked, and I think that's maybe a little bit where international kids are a little bit more appealing to some coaches, because they're like, we know the parents are going to fly from Romania to complain about where my kid's playing in the lineup,
Right.
And I think it's really hard, and I think that goes back to the triad that this whole symposium's built around, is like, if I had my number one player at Wisconsin, who's one of my favorite kids in the world, I talk to her all the time now, Lauren Chapaya, who was the 4th winningest player ever. Her dad coached her and her sister their whole life. And so when I got to Wisconsin, she was starting her sophomore year, and her dad came, and she was 13-0 at 1, and he wasn't happy. Like he kind of was mad, like giving me a hard time. Like, I don't think practices are good. And it was really, we laughed about it later, but it was just because he had a hard time letting go of control. Like, and I was like, well, I'm not sure what else I can do, because she hasn't lost a match yet. So, luckily she's an awesome mom who stepped in and made sure she took care of that a little bit. But, I think it's a matter of what I think was touched on in the last 2 days, is what hat are you wearing and when should you be wearing it? And I think when your kid goes off to college, you really need to take that coaching hat off, at least while you're there. Maybe in the summer, if you're coaching them, it's a different story. But
right.
It's a really tough dynamic, and it's very hard, because tennis is not the cheapest sport in the world. We all know that. And so parents are spending tons of money prior to college to get the scholarships. And then sometimes you find these kids are so sick and tired of playing tennis, but their options are really, they don't have an option. Mom and dad are like, you're playing. We spent $1 zillion already. I don't care if you like to play.
Right.
And I'm the coach that gets to deal with that kid.
Yeah.
As I'm sure you've experienced or heard about. So, yeah, I just think it's a really complicated thing, but I think the key is communication and honesty, and it's really tough for kids because they're not stupid. They know what you're spending. They know the hours you spent driving them back and forth and watching matches and on rackets and clothing, and but I think that's why my personal opinion, I don't have kids, but I think I would tee that off to someone else if I did. Like, you take care of the tennis,
Right.
well.
So you do a lot of mentoring, you do a lot of consulting with players and their parents, and you know what it takes to play at the collegiate level because you've been there on both sides of the fence. What are kids lacking now as they prepare for college tennis, or what are some of the things that maybe you can share with us that they need to be doing more of or a better job of if they want to play at the next level, if they want to play college tennis at some level? Give us a little insight to that, because a lot of our teaching pros, I think this could be helpful to them.
Yeah, well, I think Lisa Stone touched on this the other day with, the kids taking having some accountability. And so my service isn't about, hey, sign up with me and I'll talk to the coaches and get you a scholarship. It's literally, I'm opening up doors for you that I don't think necessarily you could have opened on your own. And really, as soon as I have interest from a coach, I'm trying to connect that coach with the kid, not the parent, with the kid. And do this type of thing with the coach and get to know each other, because again, personalities might not gel. It has nothing to do with whether the kid's a jerk or the coach is a jerk. It's just not a good fit. And you're not going to know that until you spend a fair amount of time talking to these people, finding out how they run practice, or finding out what they do if you have a really tough exam and you're freaking out and you need more time to study. Are they going to let you do that? And those are the important things, because those are the things you run into when you get to school. And then you didn't even ask these questions. So I'm in the background helping, make sure you ask, and eventually if it gets more serious with the school, I'm like, you have to talk to kids that are currently on the team. Because
Right.
the coach might not be lying, but I tell people all the time, when I'm 40 years old telling you what it's like to live in Madison, Wisconsin, I doubt my experience at 40 is the same as an 18-year-old living at Madison, Wisconsin, and an athlete. So it's just the perspectives are going to be different. So I think, one of the biggest things I was upset about and struggled with kids, and again, coming from two foreign parents who raised me maybe differently than typical American, I guess, but is that lack of accountability and the unwillingness to work it out and or sometimes just say, I got to do it because that's what I'm being told to do, again, within reason. So it was, as far as club coaches and stuff, it's just holding them accountable. Like, she's my goddaughter. She's like in her 20s now, but when I met her when she was 11, and every day she had her rackets, her water bottle, her jump rope, her TheraBand, every day. And I would go to college coaching, and every other day there's a kid, oh, I didn't bring my jump rope. And I'm like, what is going, they're like, this unacceptable. Like, this is basic stuff. You're Division I full ride athlete. Like, this isn't okay. And I think that stems often from before college, just, I was talking to my friend Maya here in Boulder, my best friend since 7th grade. She has 2 kids, a 13-year-old and 11-year-old. And, she's a teacher at the Boulder High School. And she's like, the kids forget their violin and the parents run home and bring the violin back. And no, my parents would have been like, you're not getting it today. And you're going to sit there without your violin and watch them practice, or whatever it is that ends up happening. Right. I think that lesson you learn a lot quicker to bring it next time than if your mom or dad rushes home and saves you all the time, So, and again, it's tough because, you're a parent, you love your kids, you don't want to see them suffer. I get it. But I think if you can really take a step back and realize that type of reaction is going to benefit your kid back when you're not able to rush home and you're 5 states away or a country away and you can't go home and grab their rackets for them. I left my rackets when I went to a national tournament. I left them in the club when I flew somewhere and didn't have my racket bag.
And what happened?
Yeah, I did get kind of saved, not by my parents, but I was sponsored by Wilson, so they sent me a couple. But like it was, my parents didn't save me. They were like, figure it out, which I did. But and honestly, I did kind of blame my mom when I was 16. I was like, it's your fault. You had the rackets when I was showering, and like, why wouldn't, like, typical 16-year-old,
Yeah. I think we're learning a lot about your relationship with your mother when you were 16 here. We might want to get some therapy, but that's a different presentation.
No, my mom's amazing, but she's Scandinavian. There's no BS with my mom.
Well, so we talk about accountability for the players, but from a college coaching standpoint, what are they missing on court? Can you address maybe some of the things that the teaching pros and the coaches out there can help them with on court? Because I've got some things that I'm always struggling with when we get new players in. Well, give us a little thought there.
Well, I think problem solving. Here's an interesting story. I did this with my Wisconsin team. This is what I did literally when I was on tour, and it was a rain delay, and we were all stuck in some pro shop somewhere. And like, this is the kind of dumbest game, but everyone was super into it. It's like, I'm going on a picnic. And I'd start the game and say, I'm going on a picnic and I'm bringing a tomato. And they're like, okay. And then you have to go and you say, I'm going on a picnic and I'm bringing, I don't know, you're bringing cantaloupe. And I say, well, sorry, Bill, you can't come. And then you go around, and then all of a sudden, sometimes I'm letting people come to the picnic and sometimes I'm not. And no one knows why. But then you start figuring out why. My team gave up in 5 seconds. They didn't want to play. Like, whereas on the tour when I was playing, no one quit. They were like, wait, why can she bring a tomato and I can't bring tequila? I don't, I'm like, well, you can come, even though you really can't. But if you're bringing tequila, we'll let you come. No. So it was all about what your first letter of your name is. Okay. Simple, but sometimes it would take people forever. And then once you get it, right? So I felt like, gosh, these kids, like, I love trying to figure that out, or anything like that to just, when I coached collegiately, I had players, I would say at least 70% that did not like when I came to the court and said, hey, on a changeover, like, what are you seeing? They're like, I don't know, like, just tell me what you see, tell me what to do. And I'm like, no, I don't want to tell you what to do. I want to see if you're noticing that she's missed 14 backhands in a row. Right. Because at the end of the day, I felt like my role as a college coach was, I'm going to obviously likely spend more time with you your first year or two, but I want to transition you into being independent. And that way it's a cycle. I can't spend hours in the court with one kid their third year of college when I have 3 freshmen that really do need some guidance and some steering. The goal there is to take you from, a little baby bird and let you fly, kind of thing. But there really was a lot of pushback from the kids because they wanted me to tell them.
So their ability to problem solve is one of the things both on court and off court. So it's really both.
And I think a lot of it too, again, I didn't grow up with Google, right? Like, you Google something. I mean, I Google all the time now. I'm like, imagine if we didn't have Google. Like, we didn't at some point. It's like having no GPS. Remember when we went on MapQuest and printed it out and like had papers in the car? Or like, but you figure it out, right? You figure it out with the tools that you have. And I think so. It's not that it's their fault. And it's really hard. And I think that's why, someone like Emma Doyle who does gamification, there's a reason behind it. It's because they're so conditioned to their life being revolving around that sort of activity that there's controversy around whether people like it or not, but at the end of the day, you're trying to engage the kid. But again, I'm talking at the college level, we're not going to play Harry Potter, right? Like right. Maybe I should have. But, it's about, I think I think Emilio Sanchez also said this, like 70% it's fundamental, 30% fun. And I'm a little bit more old school like that. I do think if you're playing at a high level, you can't expect it to just be fun and games all day. And I found, and again, this is part of why I could have been maybe a better college coach than I was, is I thought it was fun to compete. So for me, as long as you made it a competition, my day was good. It was the day we had baskets of balls that were not the good days. I was like, oh no, they're wheeling out all the carts. This is not good. So yeah, for club coaches or, that are kind of getting these kids ready, I think it's, you have to tap into what motivates them, but you also, I think, have to teach them that, it's not all fun and games. Federer hits forehands cross court for 10 minutes too, and I'm sure it's not like that exciting, but there's a reason. And, but there are ways, I think, that I've learned in the last few years from people that like you and going to these conferences, that you can make cross court a little bit more fun,
Right.
by adding a consequence or something. But yeah, it's tough because, it's a tough tennis is tough. You're on your own, I played soccer my whole life, and when I had a bad game, I could hide behind my 10 other teammates.
Right.
And pass the ball.
So if you've got a teaching pro out there who's got a junior that feels like maybe they're a late bloomer, because it seems nowadays there's a lot of those. What would you suggest that they do for that player, and if they want to play college tennis? Take us through that pathway of what they need to do for them or how they could help.
Yeah, well, I'm working with a girl now great athlete, but was a basketball player as well and didn't commit to tennis till like a year ago. My opinion is any good coach will see she's an athlete. And I think probably the amount of improvement she's made in just this year is pretty tremendous. So, when I'm helping her finding a school, of course, we're not looking at Power Fives or things like that, but I'm looking for a school with a coach that loves to develop a player. And what I learned the hard way, which I think most coaches have done it long enough collegiately, is, you take that kind of top kid, but you're not really sure if they love tennis, and you've heard some things, but you're like, she's really good. Yeah, bad mistake. For me anyway, it never worked out real well. They it's a small tennis team in college, and one bad egg can really do a lot of damage, especially if they're one of the better players in terms of actual results. And then I've had kids, really like my entire Louisiana team, and I give credit to the coach before me who recruited them, I did, that had so much talent but just needed guidance, and they've just worked. And it was so much fun. In our first year, we got killed. We lost first round conference. It was just rough, but they bought in, and the next year they lost in the finals of conference, like the same group of kids. Like, it was nuts. And that was so much fun. And my favorite collegiate memory as a coach was a match we lost, because it was just such a great effort. They all just put it all out there, and that's what it's about. You can't go to college expecting to win much, right? Like you go, it's about the experience. And I think all of those kids who I speak to, almost all of them still, they really still talk about it. And this was my first team 13 years ago. So, and they're all doing all kinds of things. One's working for the 250,000 ATP challengers. One's working for a big bank in Australia. They're all over the world.
Right.
But anytime we get together, it's about those stories, like I talked about in the beginning. And I just think there is a spot for everyone, as long as you're realistic about where you're at and what your trajectory realistically might be. And don't forget, if you're better than that, you might not get to the school you think you should go kill it at the school you get to, and then maybe transfer if you're that good. Then that school that you wanted to go to that wouldn't look at you might be willing to look at you after you prove yourself after a year or two. I don't want to sell the idea of you wanting to transfer, everyone transferring, but that happens. You go. Right. That's why junior college is a great route sometimes. Your level isn't where you want it to be to get to the schools you really want, so you go really work hard for 2 years in junior college under a good coach with a good schedule, and then that school at D1 that you wanted that wouldn't look at you is now interested. Right.
Well, and that's one of the things that was one of my next questions. What if you find yourself in the wrong place? You picked a school, or mom and dad said you're going to this school, or it's where my coach went. and I had a connection. You see that all the time. What if you're in the wrong place? How do you pivot or move? What are your suggestions there?
Yes, obviously my goal is to avoid that from happening, but there's no way I can sit here and say that that's not going to happen for a lot of reasons. Sometimes you go and the coach takes a different job or quits or whatever, and then next thing you know, and that's one thing you need. It's a tough one to balance because you don't want to go to school just for the coach, because we know coaches move. But at the same time, if you're really looking to be developed and that's a coach you think is going to develop you, then that might happen. My philosophy with that as a company is if you, like kids today that are transferring because they cut their program, if you were my client, I'm helping you for free, doing everything I can to get you to another program. And that's something I think that a lot of companies, I had recently had a situation with a player that's in that situation, and the company that they worked with isn't helping. So, I think you need to be careful about that. And it's disappointing because I think, of course, if you get kicked off your team because you're selling drugs or something, I'm not so sure I'm going to help you find another school.
Right.
But within reason, or if you just have a bad situation with a coach and we got it wrong, at the end of the day, the goal is for everyone, including the coaches that we send these kids to, have a great experience. And you can't always get that right.
Spending this time with you, we get to talk a lot. I've had some fun doing interviews. We did an interview a year ago when we were in Melbourne at the Australian Open. We've talked a lot, but this has been a total blast, and I hope everyone has enjoyed not only what she has to say, but taking away a lot of good information from Tina's experience and her knowledge, both on and off the court, as a player, as a coach, recruiter, and now as more of a mentor. So, Tina, thank you for being here with me. And folks, thanks for your time. Remember the Triad: parents, players, coaches, and a huge thank you to on-court, off-court, Emma Doyle, Kalindi Denifer for what they've done to put this together this week. Tina, we're going to do this again sometime soon, I hope.
I hope so. Always a
yes.
good time.